Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to analyze and discuss a topic that has come to my attention recently. And that is the plan to set up a European-wide, a EU-wide actually, superfund that takes money from individual pension funds of individual member states to fund a series of political activities. In this podcast, I want to first discuss what I have heard, what I've learned that are potentially in the plan first. And secondly, I want to talk about what are the potential future outlooks in the eurozone and in the member states of the EU. Obviously, as I have discussed previously many times, I think that the long-term outlook for the eurozone is that there will be no eurozone. But the liabilities that will be incurred on the people, the citizenry of the member states of the EU will be lasting, will last beyond the collapse of the eurozone, because you see the eurozone and the EU and the sovereign nations. I think the eurozone will disappear, but the EU will probably last a bit longer. And even if the EU disappears, the liabilities will still lay upon the member states and ultimately to the population. Thirdly and finally, I want to discuss how people in various parts of the world may respond or plan on doing what the implications are to each of them. So first, let's talk about what I think, what I've heard may be happening. So the plan, I think, from the sources that I've read, is that some European countries, mostly the ones who are more who want to play leading roles in the financial future of the European Union, want to set up a superfund, a EU-wide superfund that will take a cut of the pension funds of each member state to fund primarily two types of activities. One is an EU army, and we know who has been the most fervent advocate of this plan, the EU army. And this guy, of course, is going to face an re-election campaign next month, I think. And I think this person will be re-elected to the detriment of his country and to the continent. Secondly, the superfund is to fund a series of energy agendas in the EU. And this in the fallout of the irrational, emotional sanctions against Russia in response to the military conflict in Eastern Europe is kind of predictable, and it can be justified by the name of energy security. But of course, they want to do it also to promote their own pet projects, namely some of these green, quote-unquote, green project, wind power, solar power, etc. And they want to, and of course, electric cars, even though, interestingly, the EU doesn't make so many electric cars, and more absurdly, they can't make, I don't think they make batteries. And if they know anything, the raw material, nickel, one of the most important raw materials in making the battery packs for electric vehicles, the number one producer responsible for almost half of the global supply is exactly the country that the Europeans want to cut themselves off of. So it's really an absurd set of agendas. Nevertheless, these are the political agendas that they want to fund with this superfund. Now they want to say that this is, I think, the reason it has been explained that they want to go this way to take the pension funds instead to basically skim the pension funds of individual countries instead of setting up a new initiative. It's primarily because the European Union across the entire EU, it's already heavily taxed. Everyone has already over half of their income taken away from them in various forms of taxes and participations and etc. It would be difficult to politically motivate another way of taxing the people. So they want to, instead of doing taxes, they want to skim the pension funds. Of course, another way to fund this would be through debt monetization. But as we already know, to some extent, I think the EU is already monetizing its debt through negative interest rate and quantitative easing. And that may not be sufficient to help them get the amount of fund needed to start the project at once, because if they suddenly issue a lot of new currency, if they further cut interest rate, already it's negative, further cut it. If they just use the ECB to purchase the funds to invest in their superfund, to build an EU army and to do the energy agenda, they will come under two things. One, a lot of political resistance within the member states. And number two, they will come under a lot of, even more scrutiny from the international investors, which really, I think at this point, you, as an international investor, you have to be crazy to want to invest in any fund denominated in euro and any fund any bond denominated in euro and any bond issued by an EU member state. That would be just financial suicide, but I think still some are doing, because they probably have a lot of EU euro-denominated reserves, and they need to put that money somewhere. So not necessarily to go into the euro in order to purchase the bonds, but perhaps they just have to keep some bonds because they have the foreign reserves, and for trade reasons they need to keep some. All right. So this basically is what's happening. Now let's move on to the second section. What are the future outlooks? I want to discuss this in three subtopics. First is about spending. Spending, right? Originally, if the idea of a pension fund is that pension funds should be a sort of investment, and the pension funds are allowed only to invest in some of the safer alternatives, including bonds issued by governments. But with negative interest rate, of course, bonds could not. Pension funds could not possibly make any earning with this sort of government bonds, right? But at the same time, they are usually required by the statute to continue to invest in these government bonds. So really, I think there's not a lot of difference between between pension funds having to surrender their money to this super fund, which does not pretend to be an investment vehicle. This super fund is purely for spending, because whether it's EU army or it is for these energy agendas, those are spendings. Money are spent and nothing is going to come back. So this is a difference, but I think I think this is a distinction without a difference, because with some difference, but really it's minor, because even already these pension funds investing in these government bonds. I'm sorry, I have a problem pronouncing these words today. They already are not earning any money. They already are losing money year after year. So there is not really a lot of difference. Now they just surrender a big chunk of it, and they just stop pretending that people will be paid their pensions in full. And I think there is also an element that I want to mention, but I want to preface it by saying that this is a conspiracy theory, right? This is a conspiracy theory. I don't know if this will absolutely play out, but conspiracy theories are not always wrong. Some conspiracy theories have been proven right. All I mean by saying that this is a conspiracy theory is that it is still just a theory. It's not proven, which is about excess mortality, excess death. I think there are some people who are already pointing to data showing in countries that have used some new medication technologies that for people between the age, I think between 40 and 65, the excess mortality has gone way up, double or triple, double, 2 or 3 times of the mortality rate of the year before these medications have been rolled out and forced upon people. So, and this has been shown by some insurance companies. Some people are saying that these insurance companies are going to launch some lawsuits against the manufacturers of these medications. We don't know, but maybe some of the EU politicians are also thinking, if we have a good number of people who are in this age group who basically have paid into the pension funds, but if they are going to die before they reach the retirement age between 60 and 65, that would basically mean that we have taken their money and we don't have to pay them anything. So perhaps that is also something that they are considering. That is, I must say again, emphasize again, this is completely, at the moment, a conspiracy theory. I don't want to give credence to it, but it's a consideration. Another thing that I want to talk about in terms of the outlook is more troubling, which is the militarization of the EU. With this EU army and with a lot of the rhetoric coming out of Paris and Berlin, and of course from Warsaw, and I think Vilnius, Tallinn, and Riga, these people are getting really, and also Brussels, of course, these people are really getting worked up. They want to purchase a lot of weapons. They want to really build up their military, and perhaps to really build an EU army if they are able to get their hands on this superfund, if they can get this superfund really through. And this really means that the European Union will be militarized, which will pose, in my judgment, a threat primarily to Europe, not really to the rest of the world, because as far as I can understand, my personal opinion is that the EU economy will be in terrible shape in the coming decades, in the coming years at least. They will see a continually shrinking economy with some currency problems. I don't think that the fundamental economy will be able to help them support a strong military. But at the same time, as the spending in military increases in proportion to overall spending, with the history of militarization within the European Union, within the European continent, I do see that some conflicts could possibly arise, and maybe robbing with Russia at some point, maybe in a decade or 2 decades time. But I don't think it's going to be a big global threat, because I do think that in the future of big global powers, I see that there are maybe 4 or 5 big players, and the European countries are not among them. I think their days were mostly in the past, with mistakes, political, economic mistakes driven by political ideology. I think they are basically they have kneecapped themselves in terms of their economic strength, and that means that even with militarization, they're not going to pose great danger to the world, to world peace. But at the same time, there will be a rise of totalitarianism. In fact, we already have experienced the rise of totalitarianism under Mr. Macaroni in the Elysee, and in particular, right, this guy used forces and used internal police to beat up his citizens, the French citizens. And I think there's I currently live in France, perhaps not for long, but I see that there is a real tension that is in the French society. I think that there is very little respect within the French society of one group with the of the other, and I think that this social tension, combined with the brand of totalitarianism that has been promoted by Mr. Macaroni, is such that it's going to be a disaster for the people, not necessarily for the world, but for the people inside. And finally, I think for people who have paid up their social securities and who have been hoping to receive a decent pension after retirement in Europe, within particularly the eurozone, they will be sorely disappointed. I think that the pension that they will receive, perhaps in 5 years, will be not worth much, perhaps only a fraction, a small fraction, a rounding error of the purchasing power that they were looking at today. I'm talking about, and this is because 2 things. Number one, that the eurozone will perhaps disappear, and number 2, I think the debt burden on the economies are going to be so strong that after the disappearance of the euro, having national currencies replaced the euro, I think a lot of the governments, in particular some of the Latin ones, right? The French, I think the Italians, maybe the Spanish as well, they will probably inflate away using the old trick of debt monetization. So I don't think that the disintegration of the eurozone will be the end of it. I think after the disintegration of the eurozone, with the somewhat sane voice of Germany out of the picture, people in these Latin countries will just simply monetize their debt even to a larger degree, and people will see tremendous inflation, double-digit inflation in several years in a row. That will be very disastrous for people's pensions. For people who are living on a fixed income, this will be disastrous. By the way, these are my views on what the future lays ahead. So what can we do? I want to discuss this with regards to three groups of people. Number one, for the Americans, number two for the Europeans, and number three for the rest of the world. For the Americans, I think this actually is a win. I think by leading the Europeans down the so-called garden path, I think what the Americans can do are twofold. One, their economy will benefit by military equipment, sales of military equipment to the Europeans. And number two, they will also see a lot of the funds that have been floating in the European markets, especially owned by the Europeans, perhaps will flood to the U.S. economy, and that would mean that the U.S. financial market could be largely, relieved. I wouldn't say fully saved, but relieved. Even though it has been my view, as I've discussed in my previous podcasts, that the US dollar will very, very likely lose its reserve status as the world's sole reserve currency. I think the importance of the US dollar will remain, and because the United States, as I've repeatedly said, is still a leading industrial power. Unlike Europe, it is not deindustrialized. America still leads in many technologies, not like before, right? It used to lead in almost everything. Now, America has some competitors in Asia, right? In China, in South Korea, and of course Japan, of course, Taiwan, and some of the other ones, even in nuclear technology, in military equipment. Maybe we can talk about Russia, and then some other places, rest of the world. So even with consideration of that, America is still going to be a very strong economy, even though there are a lot of social tensions. And I think maybe we will see, I don't know if that's necessary, but maybe we will see some of the social problems that transpired in the United States in the 1960s, 1970s will reappear. But the United States is still a monolith of a country. It has a single culture. People talk about multiculturalism. No. I think it's a single culture with multiple ethnicities living in it. Everyone subscribing to, not everyone, but most people subscribing to the simple idea that there is democratic representation in the United States. Now, of course, a lot of people will argue that America was constructed originally as a republic, not as a democracy, but it has evolved into a democracy. It has these ideas. And this may not be the most efficient idea, but it is an idea that a lot of people are galvanized around. The same cannot be said for the EU, but whatever. What I want to say is here that America will be benefiting from this, if the EU sets up a superfund and again shoots itself in the foot again. Maybe it was from the sanctions, negative interest rate. Already, I think, well, you know what? The EU has shot itself in the foot with negative interest rate once, and another foot with sanctions against Russia. Now I think the EU is shooting itself in the left hand, perhaps. The next shot, I don't know whether it's in the temple or whether it's the right hand. Maybe it's through the heart. I don't know, but rest assured, the EU will shoot itself. As long as it is still breathing, it will shoot itself. Now let's talk about the second grouping, which is the European Union. Well, I think people in the EU, they need to be worried because now they're already in some European countries already implemented the policy of seizing people's assets, private assets, if they express views that are not to be accepted by the country. This is something that you see people talk about. This is so-called asset forfeiture. It is something that even in authoritarian countries, quote-unquote authoritarian countries, do not happen, right? We don't see, even in countries like Russia or China, governments don't do that. You know, people may be locked away, right, for certain crimes, and you may argue that they haven't committed those crimes. But there is a certain respect to private property that even countries that are not that don't consider themselves, or maybe that are not considered democracies, have, right? Because I think, after all, political leaders, all want to have some respect. All want people to share some respect for private properties. But within the EU, there is very little respect for private property. And people can be imprisoned, and their assets can be seized for expressing views that do not reflect the narrative. That, of course, is very troubling. So I think people who are poor, well, there's not much you can do. But if people have assets, they need to consider perhaps moving those assets to jurisdictions where they have better protection. And I'm talking about perhaps gold, and perhaps, I don't know if cryptocurrency, my view is really is no, but who knows if people if a lot of countries go really crazy about seizing people's assets, perhaps some of the encrypted digital assets are less easy and more difficult to seize. And perhaps these assets will lose a lot of value in the meantime, but at least you are left with something. So that is something that needs to be considered. I need to consider about this topic a bit more, and maybe in the future, in the coming weeks, perhaps make another podcast on it. And finally, there is that for people in the rest of the world. I think for us in the rest of the world, what we can do is just sit back, relax, and learn from the mistakes of the EU. I think really we, as the general public, we need to learn from the mistakes of the EU. Right? I think the biggest mistake for the European people is to accept the EU as a political project to encompass every aspect of their lives. You see, this EU superstructure itself is absolutely anti-democratic, and a lot of people have been talking about this. I'm not personally the biggest fan of democracies, because I share the opinion of many, which is that democracy relies upon a well-informed and intelligent populace. This simply is not really the case in the world. We have a lot of PR tools that mislead people, that misinform people. And we have, as someone has said, I don't really know who exactly is the first person who said this, but really just think about how stupid, I don't want to use that word, how unintelligent the average person is, and know that half the population is less intelligent still, right? So I think that's really a problem. I know that by saying this, some people will think that I'm elitist. I don't vote. I think that really, even if you believe in democracy, you believe in democratic values, you don't think that people are misinformed or unintelligent, you must understand that an issue with democracies is that the majority opinion rules minorities. And sometimes, not always, perhaps not even the majority of the time, but sometimes the minorities are right. And I think it's much wiser to have a select group of people who are always held responsible for the population and who hold some much better information, access to much better information to make decisions. But these should not be a single group of people that encompass every aspect of people's lives, but instead there should be experts in every single, perhaps every single arenas, and people who are well informed and well intelligent enough, well qualified, well experienced, wise enough, will be able to elect them through some type of representative democracy. I think that perhaps is how it could work. But anyway, in the EU, by giving the most important powers, by delegating this to these unelected officials in Brussels, who are not responsible for any of the decisions that they make, and who are completely out of touch with the general population. Remember, what's so interesting about the EU is that, of course, the EU wants to tax everybody. But the EU bureaucrats in Brussels, they don't pay taxes. So this is sort of what's so interesting. They want the European people to have low wages, right? They talk about competitiveness and so on, but they want themselves to get paid high salaries. And of course, within the EU, they don't want people to have cars. But of course, EU officials, they have stipends. They have cars. They have stipends, right? This is basically a set of totalitarian system that is bound to collapse. So I think for the rest of the world, it is important that we really learn from these mistakes and do not, under any circumstances, allow a select group of political figures to seize control of every aspect of our lives. We need to tell them no from the very beginning. The first step, we need to see that their motives are driven by their self-interests, not by the interests of the public. So this is today's podcast. I want to apologize because I have, I think, rambled quite a bit in today's podcast. I have not been concise at all. And this is because I think it's because I'm not feeling very, very well today. I feel a bit tired and my head is not really clear. So I apologize. Anyways, but if you still find something interesting in today's podcast, do give me a like, subscribe, and share it with people who you think perhaps will be interested in this topic and perhaps will benefit from some of the information that I provide. Thank you very much and have a great day.